It was the night of December 4, 2001, when Dr. Lucas Hale turned into the driveway of his quiet suburban home in Brighton, Virginia. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges of his windshield, the street lamps glowing halos through the fog. What should have been a short, peaceful drive from the community center felt endless. Every turn made his stomach twist harder, every bump in the road sent a wave of nausea through him so sharp it blurred his vision. Lucas wasn't the type who got sick. At 31, he was disciplined, healthy, the kind of man who drank green tea instead of soda and commuted on a bike when the weather allowed it. As a virologist studying emerging pediatric infections at the University of Virginia's Medical Research Institute, he was used to long nights in the lab, but not nights like this. His pulse fluttered with a strange, erratic rhythm, his hands trembling so badly he had to grip the steering wheel with both hands just to keep the car straight. When he finally pulled into the driveway, he let out a shaky breath and closed his eyes, hoping the world would stop tilting. It didn't. He pushed the car door open and nearly stumbled onto the pavement. The cold December air should have felt refreshing, but instead it made sweat drip down his temples. His shirt clung to him like he had run a marathon. The porch light flicked on. Marissa was already at the front door, her face framed in soft gold light, her expression a perfect sculpture of concern. She moved quickly down the steps, her slippers whispering across the cement. "Lucas? Oh my God, you look awful. What happened?" Her voice was gentle, warm, soaked in worry. He tried to answer, but a fresh wave of nausea forced him to clamp a hand over his mouth. Marissa slipped an arm around his waist, guiding him toward the house with a surprising steadiness for someone so small. To anyone watching, she would have looked like a devoted wife, supportive, loving, the picture of care. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps this story reach more people, and it makes a huge difference for the channel. Now, let's continue. Within 3 minutes, the performance had escalated. Lucas was kneeling beside the toilet, retching so violently his entire body spasmed. Strings of bile clung to his lips. His vision blurred with tears. His head throbbed so intensely he wondered if something inside it might burst. His temperature spiked so quickly that in the time it took Marissa to get a washcloth, sweat had already soaked through his shirt and the skin beneath felt like it was buzzing with heat. "Lucas, we need to go to the hospital," she urged, hovering over him. He was too weak to argue. She helped him back to the car, her arm tight around his waist, his legs buckling under him, and once again she played the role of devoted wife flawlessly. Her hand brushed his hair from his forehead. She whispered reassurances. She drove steadily, carefully, glancing at him every few seconds as if terrified for him. But the truth, the part Lucas couldn't possibly know, was far darker. Because the reason Lucas was sick, the reason he had been feeling off for weeks, the reason his hair had started thinning and his appetite disappearing, was standing right beside him. The woman who vowed to love him. The mother of his 10-month-old son sleeping upstairs. The person he trusted most in the world. Marissa Hale was the one poisoning him. She had been slipping tiny doses of a heavy metal compound into his food since late summer. Nothing lethal, not at first, just enough to make him feel weak, tired, anxious. Enough to mimic stress. Enough to keep him guessing. She understood chemistry better than most. She worked as a pharmaceutical analyst at Darrow Biomed, one of the largest private drug research companies on the East Coast. She knew dosages, absorption rates, metabolic timelines. She knew exactly how much her husband's body could take before it tipped from illness into organ-shredding crisis. And she had decided, months ago, that Lucas needed to disappear. No one knew why. Not then. Not even later, when investigators dug up half her life and found cracks everywhere. The affair. The secret accounts. The late-night phone calls. The coworker she swore was just a friend. But in the beginning, the only thing anyone saw was a sick man and a worried wife. Lucas spent 3 days in the hospital. He improved slowly, confusingly. Blood work was unusual, electrolyte imbalances, mild anemia, odd fluctuations in kidney markers, but nothing pointed to a single diagnosis. He was discharged, pale and shaky but stable. Doctors told him to hydrate, rest, and follow up with his primary care physician. Marissa stayed by his side the whole time, doing crosswords in the chair beside his bed, rubbing his arm when he cried from the pain. No one suspected her. Not yet. 6 years earlier, when Lucas met Marissa at a graduate research mixer, he was struck by her intelligence. She was the type who filled a room quietly, her confidence tucked beneath layers of observation. Her dark hair fell across her cheek as she talked about molecular pathways with the ease most people talk about movies. Lucas was smitten. She seemed driven, brilliant, a partner who understood his passion for research. They married 2 years later, bought a fixer-upper outside Richmond, and had their son, Ethan, just shy of their 4th anniversary. To outsiders, their life was enviable, a pair of young scientists with promising careers, a beautiful baby, a clean 2-story home with a white fence and a vegetable garden in the back. But behind the front door, things were shifting. Money was always tight. Lucas, driven by idealism, chose research over industry, preferring to work on groundbreaking pediatric treatments instead of cashing out in private sector pharmaceuticals. His research grants paid enough to get by, but not enough for the life Marissa wanted. She liked nice things, designer handbags, real vacations, not the cheap cabin trips Lucas planned with good intentions and limited funds. At Darrow Biomed, Marissa met Adrian Cole, another analyst in her division. He was charming, funny, a little reckless. He had a way of making her feel seen in a way Lucas no longer did. Adrian was married, too, with 2 children, but that didn't slow the gravitational pull between them. The affair began sometime around March of that year. At first it was just after-work drinks and long conversations in his car. Then there were hotel rooms, business trips where they shared a taxi, but booked separate rooms only on paper, and eventually promises, messy, heated, selfish promises, about a future neither of them could actually build. Phone records later showed hundreds of calls between them in October and November alone, some lasting nearly an hour, others mere seconds, likely hang-ups when one of them lost their nerve. Emails retrieved from Marissa's work computer painted an even clearer picture, confessions of love, jealousy over time spent with spouses, plans for a life free of complications. What Lucas never knew was that the marriage he thought was strained had actually collapsed months before. And by late November, he began to sense something was wrong. Marissa came home late from work more often. She seemed impatient, distracted, dismissive. When he asked questions, her answers were clipped or rehearsed. He didn't suspect an affair, he trusted her too deeply for that, but he worried something else was going on. Stress? Depression? Overwork? The last thing Lucas Hale thought was that the woman who kissed him goodnight would be plotting his death. Everything accelerated after his hospital discharge. For a few days, he felt almost normal, still tired, still sore, but functional. He helped feed Ethan, returned a few emails from his lab, reheated leftovers Marissa prepared, not knowing that every bite was a step closer to the end. It was December 11th when it happened. A week after his first collapse. Marissa made dinner for just the 2 of them, pan-seared chicken, roasted vegetables, jasmine rice. Lucas ate slowly, still wary of his sensitive stomach. Marissa barely touched her plate. By midnight, the nausea returned with a vengeance. He woke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding unevenly. Pain radiated from his abdomen like a drill twisting deeper with every breath. He stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the walls, barely making it before he vomited. His legs gave out and he collapsed on the tile. Marissa found him like that. Or appeared to. Her gasp was too perfect. her trembling hands too controlled. Her voice broke in just the right places as she called 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Lucas was barely conscious. His skin was ghostly, his pulse thready, his breaths shallow. The paramedics rushed him into the ambulance, Marissa following behind them, her face a mask of panic. But that night, something changed. A young ER nurse named Cheryl noticed something odd. Lucas's symptoms seemed too aggressive, too sudden, too severe. His lab work came back with alarming kidney damage, unexplained metabolic acidosis, and, this time, trace levels of a heavy metal compound that raised every red flag she had. She alerted the attending physician. The attending alerted hospital administration. They alerted the toxicology team. And within hours, the police had been contacted. It was December 13th when the first official investigation began. But it was already too late. Lucas Hale slipped into a coma that evening, his organs failing one by one. And as he lay motionless in a hospital bed, machines breathing for him, doctors fighting to stabilize him, and nurses buzzing around him like frantic wasps, Marissa sat in the corner of the room, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't cling to him. She watched. Lucas died on December 15th, at 3:06 a.m. He was 31. The autopsy revealed structural damage consistent with prolonged heavy metal exposure, more than one dose, more than one incident, more than one attempt. His hair samples were preserved. And weeks later, forensic analysis would show peaks of toxins stretching back over 5 months, each spike a separate event. Someone had been poisoning Lucas since midsummer. Someone who had access. Someone who cooked his meals. Someone who knew exactly how much his body could tolerate. Someone who wanted him gone. And that someone was sitting in their shared home, rocking their baby boy to sleep, acting like a grieving widow. But the cracks were already forming. And soon, everything she tried to hide would come to the surface. By the time Lena Caldwell realized something was fundamentally wrong, the house no longer felt like a home. Silence had turned dense, almost physical, a kind of pressure that followed her from room to room. Even when Adrian wasn't around, she felt him, his choices, his calculations, his growing distance. The atmosphere inside their home was shifting in ways she didn't yet understand, but her body seemed to sense danger long before her mind could piece it together. If you haven't already, take a second to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps keep these stories coming. Now, back to the investigation. The nausea was no longer an occasional disruption. It was constant. Some mornings she woke up trembling so violently she had to sit on the floor just to keep from falling. Her joints ached in cycles, random, sharp waves that left her clutching her legs. She told herself it was stress, the result of balancing work with Adrian's new coldness, but instinct whispered otherwise. She could feel something foreign moving through her, hurting her in ways she couldn't track or explain. At night, she tried to pretend it was normal. She held a warm compress to her stomach, watched the walls blur at the edges of her vision, and told herself she wasn't becoming weaker. But even simple tasks, like carrying laundry upstairs or standing at the sink, began demanding rest breaks. Her body felt drained. Hollow. Hijacked. Adrian noticed, she could see it, but he didn't show concern. His eyes followed her sometimes, quietly, as if he were studying an experiment from a distance, observing what changed and what didn't. Whenever she caught him watching, he offered a faint, quick smile before looking away. There was no warmth in it. No shared fear or worry. Just a strange, clinical calm. She didn't know yet that the shift in him had begun long before her symptoms. She didn't know that he had already decided she was no longer essential. Or desirable. Or even human enough for guilt. When she discovered the first hint, it was unintentional. She reached for Adrian's phone to silence an alarm he'd left ringing in the kitchen. The screen lit up. A message preview flashed. Still awake? Miss our talk. Another followed seconds later. Can't stop thinking about last night. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Everything she'd been trying to explain away suddenly lined up in one straight, painful line. The late nights. The new energy in him. The indifference. The excuses. He'd replaced her long before her body began failing. When Adrian walked into the kitchen, she set the phone down gently, as if it were nothing. As if she hadn't just felt her entire life shift beneath her feet. He paused, looked at her face, then glanced at the phone. You okay? He asked mildly. She wanted to scream. Instead, she nodded once and walked past him. Her voice felt too small to use. And he didn't stop her. He didn't ask what hurt. He didn't ask what she'd seen. He simply let her go, like whatever bond once existed between them had already dissolved. But something in Lena hardened that day. A quiet, trembling strength formed at the edges of her fear. She didn't confront him, not yet. She wasn't ready for the fallout, not when her body already felt like it was collapsing. She needed space. Answers. Something to hold on to. The following week, her symptoms worsened abruptly. She lost weight fast, too fast. A bruise appeared on her hip from simply leaning against the counter. She trembled constantly. Her heartbeat fluttered unpredictably. The world tilted when she stood up. And Adrian, nothing. No worry. No questions. Sometimes he barely looked at her. One night, as she lay awake struggling to get enough air, she realized she could no longer trust anything around her. Not the food. Not the water. Not the routines that once felt safe. She didn't yet suspect Adrian of harming her, but she did know she needed neutral ground, somewhere she could breathe without him hovering in her periphery. She called her sister, Mara. The moment she heard Lena's voice, Mara said, "You sound awful. I'm picking you up. Now." Lena didn't protest. When Mara arrived, she took one look at her and nearly cried. Lena's skin had faded into a chalky pallor. Her hands trembled when she tried to lift her bag. Her breath came shallow and uneven. Mara wrapped her in a hug so tight Lena melted against her, too tired to stand on her own. "You're coming to my place," Mara said firmly. No arguments. Lena didn't have the strength to argue. When Adrian came home to find her gone, he didn't call. He sent a single text, "Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything." It was colder than silence. Mara insisted they go to the hospital the next morning. Lena tried to resist out of fear of overreacting, but that fear evaporated 30 minutes into the ER assessment. The nurse saw her blood pressure and her unsteady posture and immediately pushed her higher on the triage list. Blood tests were ordered. Vitals repeated. She drifted in and out of dizzy spells while Mara paced near the chair, anxiety etched deep into her features. When the doctor returned, his expression carried something Lena hadn't seen in weeks, genuine alarm. He asked a series of detailed questions. What medications was she on? Any new supplements? Had she changed her diet? Was she exposed to chemicals at work? Did she drink from any unusual sources? Had she noticed any metallic tastes, unusual hair loss, tingling, or heart palpitations? Some questions confused her. Others terrified her. "What's going on?" she whispered when he stepped closer. "We're seeing signs of significant toxicity," he said carefully. "We're running specific panels now. We'll know more soon." Toxicity. The word echoed through her. She didn't understand. Nothing in her life made sense anymore. Mara's face drained of color. The doctor asked permission to run heavier metal screens and additional toxicology. Lena agreed with a weak nod. She was too exhausted to ask anything else. She was admitted for monitoring. Fluids ran through and for. Her heartbeat steadied slightly but not enough. Her blood pressure remained low. Her vision blurred every time she moved. She was frightened, more frightened than she had ever been, but the hospital at least felt safe. She finally slept. When she woke the next morning, two things happened almost simultaneously. A nurse gently told her the medical team needed more samples for follow-up testing. And Adrian walked in. He stood at the doorway with a carefully arranged look of concern. Anyone else might have believed it. Lena didn't. Not anymore. She had known his expressions for years, and the one he was wearing now looked practiced, not felt. "Why didn't you tell me you were this sick?" he asked lightly, as if she owed him something. Mara moved closer to the bed, her posture protective. "She's resting," she said sharply. Adrian's jaw tensed for a split second. Then he smiled at Lena again, soft and apologetic. "I just want to help." She didn't have the strength to argue with him. She barely had the strength to speak. Instead, she closed her eyes and let his words wash over her, meaningless and hollow. But Mara watched him closely. Too closely. She'd always had a sharp instinct for people, and something about his calmness struck her as wrong, especially considering the severity of Lena's condition. He stayed only a few minutes. He kissed Lena's forehead lightly, as though performing concern for an audience. Then he promised he'd bring things from home and quietly left the room. Mara stood by the door long after he'd gone. "You didn't tell him you're being tested for poisoning," she whispered. Lena stared at the ceiling, fear rippling through her. "I don't know anything yet." "You don't have to," Mara said softly. "His face told me enough." But neither of them voiced the darkest thought forming quietly between them. A week earlier, the idea that someone was intentionally hurting Lena would have sounded absurd. Impossible. Undeniable paranoia. Now it didn't feel so far-fetched. 2 days later, the toxicology report returned, and the doctor asked to speak with Lena privately. Mara stayed anyway, Lena insisted, and the doctor didn't push back. His voice was steady, but the information wasn't. The results were highly unusual, he said. Concerning a specific toxin, one rarely encountered outside specialized environments, had been detected in her system. Multiple doses. Over time. The pattern wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. Someone had been poisoning her. Lena felt her world tilt sharply, violently. She clung to the edges of the hospital bed, struggling to breathe. Her mind raced. Who would do this? How? When? But the name that rose inside her chest chilled her deeper than the diagnosis. She didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But the thought sat cold and heavy in her mind. Adrian had access. Adrian had knowledge. Adrian had motive. The doctor wasn't finished. He explained that law enforcement would need to be alerted. He also asked whether she felt safe returning home. Lena didn't hesitate. No. Her voice came out fragile, but her certainty didn't waver. That same afternoon, a detective arrived to ask preliminary questions. He spoke gently, explaining that they needed to examine her belongings, her food, her environment. They needed hospital records. Timelines. Anything she could remember. When he asked whether anyone had access to her meals, drinks, or medications, Lena looked down at her hands. She didn't want to say the word. It felt like betraying the life she'd built, even if that life had already been crumbling. But the truth had teeth now. "My husband," she whispered. The detective didn't react. He simply wrote it down, his expression unreadable. By the time he left, Mara was pale. "You can't go back there," she said firmly. Lena knew. She felt it deep in her bones. That night, long after the hospital lights dimmed, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the past 3 months. Every strange shift. Every unexplained symptom. Every cold glance Adrian had given her as she fell apart in front of him. The truth wasn't fully formed yet. But the shape of it was emerging, dark around the edges, impossible to ignore. The man she loved was not who she believed he was. And something inside her whispered that the worst part of the story hadn't happened yet. The investigation moved quietly at first, almost too quietly, as if the detectives were afraid of disturbing something fragile. They asked questions in soft tones, took notes in deliberate silence, and reassured Lena that she wouldn't have to go back home until the situation became clearer. But clarity was not a comfort. It was a weight pressing closer every day, bringing with it truths she didn't want but could no longer avoid. Before we go any further, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It keeps the channel growing and ensures you never miss the next chapter. Let's get back into the story. Detective Callan returned 2 days after their initial talk. He was calm, patient, with the kind of steady presence that made people feel safe even when the worst was unfolding. He carried a slim folder, closed but full, and the moment he sat down, Lena felt her stomach tighten. She could feel the shift in the air. The investigation wasn't just beginning anymore. It had traction. He asked again about her routine, but this time his questions were pointed. What meals did she typically eat at home? Who usually prepared them? Did she share drinks? Did Adrian bring her coffee in the mornings? Did he insist she take certain supplements? Had anything tasted bitter or metallic? Had he discouraged her from seeing a doctor earlier? Each question felt like a crack forming in the life she used to trust. When she finished answering, he paused, tapping his pen lightly. Then he told her they'd already executed a limited search of her home, strictly environmental testing for possible contaminants. They were still waiting on results. But there was something else. They'd interviewed neighbors. One mentioned hearing arguments between Lena and Adrian in the weeks before she left. Another recalled seeing Adrian walking to the garage late at night, carrying something metallic. A third mentioned a woman visiting the house once when Lena wasn't home. The ground under her felt unsteady. For now, the detectives didn't confront Adrian. They wanted more evidence, more certainty. Poisoning cases weren't simple, they required medical proof, environmental proof, behavioral proof. Every step had to be airtight. Lena tried to rest, but rest never came. Her body was slowly stabilizing with treatment, but her mind was spinning constantly. Every memory felt like a clue now. Every interaction with Adrian played back in her head with new meaning. Things she once brushed off now carried sharp edges. The day she fainted in the hallway, he didn't help her up. The time she vomited after dinner, he blamed her sensitive stomach. The week she couldn't taste food, he said she was overreacting. All those nights he watched her from across the room, not worried, not curious, but waiting. Waiting for what? The answer came sooner than she expected. 3 days later, Detective Callan returned again, this time with a different expression, graver, heavier. He sat at her bedside and opened the folder. Inside were several printed pages, testing results, and photographs of items from her home. Lena, he began quietly, we have preliminary findings. Her hands tightened around the blanket. He explained that trace amounts of the exact toxin found in her blood were discovered in the kitchen, specifically in the drawer where Adrian kept his personal coffee supplies. A sealed bottle of liquid sweetener he used daily tested positive. Not the bottle in the pantry where she could see it. A second bottle hidden away. Next, they found residue on 2 drinking glasses from the drying rack, both of them ones she remembered using. They'd tested cookware, utensils, the refrigerator shelves, and even the dispenser in the fridge door. The contamination pattern wasn't random. It was precise. It was targeted. They had also pulled financial records for the past 3 months. Adrian had made several unusual purchases from obscure online suppliers, none of which had any ordinary household use. Chemical components. Lab-grade materials. Items requiring specialized knowledge to handle safely. Her breath froze in her throat. The detective's voice grew quiet. Lena, this wasn't accidental. Mara put a hand on Lena's arm, grounding her just as the room seemed to tilt. But there was more, something Detective Callan had saved for last, the part that made his voice go even lower. We found messages, he said. Between Adrian and a woman he's been involved with. The tone suggests the relationship wasn't new. Lena's pulse hammered in her ears. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They weren't just inappropriate. They contained planning. They contained intent. In one conversation, the woman mentioned how much easier things would be once everything is settled. Adrian replied that life would be simpler soon. Another exchange referenced Lena's health declining, with Adrian responding, "It won't be long." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Mara inhaled sharply, her eyes filling with rage and disbelief. Detective Callan continued carefully, "We believe the relationship may be connected to his motive." Lena's breath shattered. She hadn't imagined the emotional distance. She hadn't imagined the coldness. She hadn't imagined the feeling that he was already somewhere else entirely. But she never imagined he would build a whole future without her, a future he planned to create by removing her. The detective assured her she was safe. Adrian was being watched. They were preparing to conduct a full interview with him soon, depending on the final toxicology confirmations. But Lena could barely absorb the reassurance. She felt hollow, unreal, like she was watching someone else's tragedy from outside her own body. She was still trying to understand how the man she'd trusted with her life had quietly, strategically tried to end it. That night, the hospital felt colder than usual. The hallway lights were dim. Machines hummed softly. Mara stayed in the room, curled in the chair, refusing to leave her sister alone. But even with someone beside her, Lena couldn't close her eyes without seeing flashes, Adrian's face in the doorway, his calm stare as she grew weaker, the messages he sent to someone else while she suffered. She didn't know it yet, but while she lay awake, the investigation was accelerating. Detectives obtained a warrant for Adrian's personal laptop. Inside, they found research, dozens of searches about dosage, detection windows, toxicity levels, and case studies of similar substances. He'd read articles, watched videos, downloaded PDFs from scientific journals. It was calculated, thorough, chillingly logical. There were also spreadsheets, neatly organized logs tracking Lena's symptoms over time. Her weight loss. Her appetite changes. The days she vomited. The days she slept excessively. Notes on her breathing, her energy, her tremors. He had been documenting her decline like she was a controlled experiment. Meanwhile, detectives continued combing through the house. In the garage, they found a hidden box tucked behind old holiday decorations. Inside was a small vial that matched the substance found in her blood. Another vial was half empty. Latex gloves. A syringe with trace contamination. Printed notes. The evidence piled higher and higher. But the most disturbing discovery was a handwritten journal. Adrian had always been meticulous, and his writing reflected it, clean lines, carefully structured thoughts. Some entries appeared detached, almost clinical, discussing progress and setbacks. Others mentioned future plans and necessary transitions. One entry read, "When everything is aligned, I won't have to pretend anymore." Another, "She's fading faster now. Timing should work out." Detective Callan returned to the hospital the following afternoon, holding the journal in a sealed evidence bag. He didn't show it to Lena, he didn't need to. He told her gently that they had enough to move forward. They would be bringing Adrian in. Lena felt a mixture of relief and horror swirl inside her. Relief that the truth was finally exposed. Horror that the truth had ever existed in the first place. But nothing prepared her for what came next. The detectives didn't need to hunt him down. Adrian showed up at the hospital unexpectedly, walking straight into the lobby carrying a bag of clothes he claimed Lena had asked for. He looked calm. Too calm. His shirt neatly pressed. His hair carefully combed. He approached the front desk, asking to see his wife. Before anyone could answer, 2 officers stepped forward. Adrian Caldwell? One asked. He looked confused for half a second, then quickly rearranged his expression into polite curiosity. Yes? You need to come with us. Adrian blinked, then gave a small, bewildered laugh. Is this a mistake? They didn't answer. They read him his rights. Nurses watched in stunned silence. Visitors stopped moving. Even the security guard near the elevator froze. Adrian's eyebrows knit together as if he were offended by the inconvenience. He kept saying he didn't understand. He asked if someone could explain what was happening. He insisted he was there only to help his wife. But when he turned his head slightly, just enough to catch Lena's room number on the board behind the desk, his eyes narrowed, only for a fraction of a second, but enough for the detective watching to notice. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. They led him out of the hospital in handcuffs. Inside her room, Lena didn't see the arrest. She only heard footsteps stop outside her door, muffled voices, and then Detective Callan quietly stepped inside moments later. It's done, he said softly. He's in custody. Lena nodded slowly, her body trembling with relief and devastation intertwined. She wasn't sure whether to cry or collapse. She felt as if she were floating above the world, suspended between grief and survival. For the first time in months, she could breathe without fear. But she also understood something she had never expected to face. She had been sleeping beside someone who studied her suffering. Someone who documented her decline. Someone who planned her absence as if it were an item on a list. And yet, she survived. Because something inside her, instinct, timing, maybe fate, pushed her out of that house just in time. When she finally closed her eyes that night, she didn't see Adrian stare anymore. She didn't feel the weight of his decisions crushing her. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. And she knew that the story of what happened to her wasn't just about punishment or justice. It was about the quiet strength of survival.